So you've decided that you need a property manager for your rental property. But how do you find a good one? Maybe you've had bad experience in the past with other managers, or maybe you've just never hired a manager before and you don't know where to start. Whatever your situation, in this edition of the Ask Coach podcast, we're going to tackle this property management question, and we're getting started right now. Today's question was inspired by one of our YouTube viewers, Florida Multifamily Syndicators, and by many questions about property management inside my private community, Rental Property Mastery. If you haven't heard of Rental Property Mastery, it's the place where I'm coaching and helping small and mighty real estate investors to buy more properties, raise more funds, and turn their rental properties into passive income so they can achieve financial freedom. You can check it out or join at the link below in the podcast or the video description. Welcome to the Ask Coach edition of the Real Estate Investing with Coach Carson podcast. I'm your host, Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach Carson, and this is a show to help you get out of the financial grind so you can spend your time doing more of what matters. To help me with this question, I've invited on one of the smartest real estate investors I know, my friend Erion Shehaj from Houston, Texas. He's also a real estate agent and known as the investing architect. Now let's go to our conversation.
A good property manager can make the difference between, make your performance go from good to great, essentially, or worse sometimes. So it's a critical piece in the real estate investing space, especially if you're investing from out of state or out of your area. It's you don't have the option of saying, oh, well, I'm just going to manage it myself. So it's critical to figure out a way, and especially if you're going to try to scale your portfolio, it's very hard to manage them all yourself anyway. So the skill of finding a great property manager is very useful. So, I like frameworks and processes. So I have a 3-step process for this as well. The very first step that you want to do is you want to sort of define your needs and expectations, right? So you want to figure out, well, what kind of property do I own, right? Do I own, single family rentals that are in Class A or Class B locations? Do I own, small multifamily properties that are in, Class C locations? Because depending on the type of property that you need, your property management needs also vary at the same time. The second thing you want to sort of establish for yourself is, what is your level of involvement? Like how involved do you want to be in the process? There are some people that aren't really looking for a property manager. They're looking for a helper. Like they want to do all the work and they want to keep control over every process. And they just want an assistant that's going to, ask for 12 quotes and, do this and do that. And they're looking for a gopher more than a property manager, right? And if that's the case, you may need an admin versus a property manager. Or are you a person that wants, armchair money? Like, do you want to just sit back and let them handle everything and you just sort of want to manage the manager? What's your level of involvement? Then you want to, what are your expectations in terms of tenant management? Like, are you the type of investor that looks at your tenants as your customers? So you want to keep them happy and keep them, or are you more adversarial and more sort of confrontational with your tenants, right? Because the style of property manager is going to come into play when it comes to that as well. In terms of maintenance, right? What are your expectations in terms of maintenance? Are you the type of property, do you want your properties to have preventative maintenance? Like you go in, try to get ahead of the problem? Or are you the type of person that says, until it's broken, I don't want to pay any money, right? Because there's different property managers for different styles of maintenance. And then finally, it's, you have to look at costs and fees. Like, what are your expectations for, what property management should cost, what all the services and the type of property management that you expect. Sometimes that's the issue, is like you can't have one without the other. You can't have like white glove property management for the price of a hot dog, right? Like you have to figure out, like, if your expectations are for somebody who will be a white glove property manager, they're going to charge white glove property management fees, right? So going through and defining your needs and expectations is the critical first step in that process.
Yeah, it's getting clear. A lot of whether it's a property manager, a contractor, any team member problems I've had myself, but also I've seen in other people, it's a communications and clarity issue so many times where I'm not even clear on my own expectations. So how can I delegate to somebody what they're supposed to do? Like instead, you kind of hire somebody, you stick your head in the sand and say, "Oh, I just hope they take care of it for me. Like I hope this is all okay." It requires a little bit more responsibility on your part. Although it's a quote passive investment, you have to upfront in real estate do some work in terms of understanding what a property manager should do, what they can't do, the different levels of service. I'm hearing you say there's a little bit of education and some work to be done up front. Is that accurate?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, it's a recipe for frustration not to set expectations and be clear and communicate what you expect, and then expect them to be a mind reader and deliver on all the expectations that you didn't communicate.
If you're brand new, so I'm hearing some people like a more experienced investor, like for example, I managed all my properties myself with a business partner. We internally hired somebody to help us with bookkeeping for a while. And then eventually we're like, okay, 10 years in, we're just going to hire external property managers. I had a pretty good expectation because I've done some of this stuff. If somebody's brand new and they're like, okay, I'm buying my first property in Houston, Texas, and I live in California, like how do I even understand what I should be asking? I don't even know what I should be asking. Like maybe speak to me in that situation.
Yeah. And this is the perfect segue, because the second part of the framework is you have to look at there are 5 key qualities that you should look for in a property manager. And the first one is superior market knowledge. In other words, they need to be knowledgeable about the local market. They need to know rents like the back of their hand. They need to understand like the cadence of tenant demand. What I mean by that is, when is the hot leasing season, and when do things drop off, and because understanding those patterns can really make a difference in, because the rent is not the rent is not the rent. Like the rent in June is not the same as the rent in December 28th if you have a vacancy in both of those time frames. So getting a property manager that really knows the market and really understands the rents and tenant demand and supply and absorption rates and things of that nature, I think that is the first quality you want to look for. So
I agree 100%. And I always tell people that there's so many amazing tools right now to estimate rent, like Zillow, Rent Estimator, and Bigger Pockets is getting in on the game. And there's Rentometer. I mean, there's all these tools, which are fantastic. I'm glad we have those. But if I ever like my number one choice of how to analyze the market and understand not only the rental rate, but all those other dynamics that you're talking about, which streets are get what rate and what time of year is easier, like that's their expertise. They know that like the back of their hand if they're a good property manager. And so I guess you could ask that, you can interview them, right? Hey, can you tell me more about this neighborhood? Like what are the trends in that neighborhood? What's the rent like? Why is the rent more over here? You can ask questions to sort of learn whether this person teaches you, and they should be your teacher as much as anything when you start asking
100%.
those kind of questions.
You have to be curious, right? And so you don't want to ask. You want to ask open-ended questions. So you don't want to ask yes or no questions. Like, is there rent 1,500? Yes. It's like you're not getting anything out of that, right? If you want to judge their knowledge, and you say, hey, for example, it would be like, hey, I'm considering purchasing a property in this area. What can you tell me about the rents in the area, right? And if you interview 2 or 3 different property managers, you will be shocked at the difference between the answers that you get. Sometimes you'll get very sort of vague answers and very general answers. And then when you find the right one, you'll realize that they are head and shoulders above the others.
I like asking this open-ended question. If I'm interviewing a new person, I would say, if I could bring you the easiest property to rent that you would just love finding tenants for, that would just be like the best in your whole portfolio, what kind of property would that be? Tell me about it.
It's a great question.
Because it's not only location. Like I'll just give somebody specific example in my market. And as an investor who's also managed properties, I would say in Clemson, where you're going to be renting to students, number one, you want to be convenient to campus. You want to be convenient to downtown. These particular neighborhoods, I think, are some of the most convenient ones. And then I've also noticed the trend lately that a lot of tenants don't like to have 3 roommates anymore. They like to be on their own. So many people want to have 1 bedrooms and studios. And so we have more demand for studio apartments and 1 bedrooms and anything else. We fill those up right away. Like what an amazing like piece of information they just gave you.
You wouldn't think that, right? Like
Yeah.
those are the contrarian ideas that you
Yeah.
wouldn't think naturally as common sense.
Yeah, but right there, that golden, like those two golden nuggets, like these neighborhoods are on the bus line, convenient, and then you can find a studio like that. Right, you just created your buy box for like the perfect investment, and now you can start go shopping just from the piece of information that property manager gave you. So that's the kind of nuggets you can get when I'm just confirming what you say about that market knowledge is so critical.
They just paid for their property management services for 3 years just with that piece of advice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. So what's number two? The number one is the market knowledge. What else do you look for in a manager?
So this is the big one, and I think this is the key sort of point of friction between investors and property managers is you need to make sure that there's incentive alignment, right? And this is the biggest problem, in my opinion, is that when you have a property management company that basically makes more money when there are repairs, when there are make-readies, when there's more turnover, when there's more movement and friction in your property, and you want exactly the opposite of those things. You want less turnover, you want less repairs and less issues. That creates a fundamental misalignment of incentives. And that is the part where the investor doesn't feel like the person is their partner. They don't feel like this person's on my side because they benefit from exactly the things that hurt me, right? So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're working with a property manager that has a more of a long-term worldview rather than, hey, I'm going to pad every expense that I charge you. Every repair is going to have my profit margin in it. They have to be more forward-looking than that. So I would look at their structure. I would ask questions around the structure of, like who does your repairs and your make-readies? Are those in-house or are you using vendors? And if you use vendors, like am I paying the price that you're paying the vendor, or am I paying the price plus a profit, or am I, because those are critical. Like if you want a harmonious relationship and a true partnership with your property manager, the incentives need to be aligned.
In your mind, you're an investor and you help people find investment properties. Is it automatically a red flag if somebody has maintenance markups in there? Does that automatically mean that they're a no-go, or does it mean we just need to look at the overall structure of their incentives?
No, I don't think it's a no-go. I just think it needs to be transparent. So me as an investor, and by the way, we also run a property management company in Houston too, which was the management company that we created for the thing that we couldn't find in the marketplace from an investor perspective. But so it's not, I don't mind if somebody says, hey, this is my model and this is how I make my money, right? Like we're not communists, right? We don't want people to not make money. But what I don't like is the hidden aspect of it, or the non-transparent aspect of it, where you send me an invoice that has a price on it, but the invoice that the vendor sends you is a different one. Like I don't want the margin to be hidden, yes. Right? So if you say, hey, my vendor charges this and I charge a 10% coordination fee, a 15% profit margin, what have you, then I can make a decision. Like, is that good enough for me or not? Yeah. And that's, once I make the decision, is fine. But so it's not a red light, green light situation, but it's more of a transparency and trust issue.
Yeah, I've had some issues recently with the people I'm helping find property managers, and that the trust issue is the big one. It was exactly what you're saying, that it wasn't transparent. All of a sudden, they're getting a $4,000 bill, which should have seemed like it should have been $2,000, and it's just you get blindsided.
It was.
Yeah, exactly. And you lose, and now that one bill, you've lost trust on everything else they've done, and you're now having to nitpick every single bill. Like that doesn't work. Like trust is a critical component of every relationship I have, because I don't want to look at every single bill. I don't want to pay attention. I want to audit things here and there, but I don't want to have to. If you're having to watch everything somebody does in a regular relationship or a business relationship, you're in trouble.
It's like you're in a partnership with a Trojan horse, right? And that's not a good partnership to be
exactly. In. Exactly. I love that one. Incentive alignments. It has to do with their business plan, how they make money, understanding that. Number one was market knowledge. What else would you look for in a property manager?
So I personally would look for a proactive maintenance approach, meaning, how do they handle their repairs? Like, do they, you know, do they make, because I look at this strategically, right? In other words, I don't want to minimize repairs now, and I'm basically just deferring them to the future to a much larger bill, right? Like, I would much rather my property manager tell me, hey, we're going to go in and during vacancy, we're going to service all these AC units, even though we don't know if they need it or not, but we're just going to service them because that's going to keep them from, you having a $3,000 bill in the middle of the summer. Like those types of, to me, like people talk about value add in multifamily, like there's value add in property management. And that's one of the ways that a good property manager can add value to their investors.
And if people have any question about that, I've had so many emergency maintenance issues over the years, and it's easily costs you 2 or 3 times more to have an emergency repair than it does being proactive and preventative. And I had a hard time getting my head around it because early in my career, every dollar, like if I didn't have enough money, I'm like,
it mattered.
Me spending $1,000 is like going to put me in the red, and I'm going to have to dig into my reserves. So like, I get that, like really that angst that happens when you're having to spend money and write a check for multiple thousands of dollars. But that's one of the reasons that you mentioned earlier, you have to have cash reserves. You got to be liquid because sometimes the long-term best decision, very often the long-term best decision hurts a little bit in the short run, but there's a payoff if you're patient and you invest that money. And maintenance has been it's the least sexy topic, but to me, it's risen to pretty much to the top of my rental property topics of importance, because I've had so many deals that were not good because either the property was just high maintenance itself or we didn't manage the maintenance well. And this is one of those issues, to the point that we now have a quarterly inspection with one property manager who kind of the high maintenance student rentals. But then we also have at least once a year, we're going through like a comprehensive list of preventative maintenance items, checking the water moisture level here, checking the heating and air unit. Like they're so critical. And it's something I missed it for years and didn't pay attention to that kind of stuff. And my property managers now are a big part of that, being able to do that because they have a team who helps me execute that.
Yeah, no, and I think that's critical because also, you mentioned earlier emergency repairs. I mean, if you've been an investor for longer than 2 minutes, you know that to a tenant, everything is an emergency repair.
That's true. True. But a hot water heater that breaks in the middle of the night, but it was rusted out for a year and a half before that, but it broke in the middle of the night on Christmas Eve. And this is the reason nobody wants to get in rental properties. I don't want to get a call in the middle of the night because of a hot water heater that's leaking out throughout the house. Well, that a real emergency happens every once in a while. Chance happened, but most of the time is because that thing was rusted out. We didn't pay attention to it. We could have solved that problem ahead of time. I've had my contractor tells me that he's like, these two water heaters, you're going to have problems here in the next year or two. You need to go ahead and solve this. And you can either not do that and just ignore it, or you can go ahead and solve the problem and get it taken care of.
I mean, a lot of times, just the age of it tells you, like, you don't even need to see that they're rusted out. They're 12 years old, so it's no wonder that they broke. So you also need to keep track of sort of the useful life of your systems and sort of change ahead of the leak instead of after.
Love it. These are really good. So I'm taking notes. And what do you have anything else you would look for in good property managers?
Yeah. So the second biggest point of frustration for investors with their property manager is sort of their bedside manner with their tenants. So basically like tenant management and communication skills, right? So they feel like they're sort of in the dark. They don't know what's going on. So I would look for a property manager that almost over communicates rather than under. The property manager has a difficult job because they have to strike this delicate balance between being a steward for their owner, which is their primary job, but at the same time they've got this tenant, right, that they've got to treat fairly and keep them happy, within reason, right? So striking that balance is not easy. So asking questions around how do they, like, it would be one of those interview questions, like, tell me about a time when you had a challenging tenant and how did you handle that? And, how did you go about solving that problem? Like, those would be good questions to ask.
And I would also ask, when was there a time when you had a tenant make a request that was unreasonable and you had to push back on them and say, no, that's actually something that you're responsible for, or that doesn't need to be happen. That way you could, because there's that line, that a tenant, naturally, I understand. I've been a tenant too. You're going to push to a point to see what they'll do and what they won't do and what's my responsibility. And so there's some coaching and some teaching that has to go on about who's responsible for what, and whether that, that little discoloration in the carpet is something that is going to be, rip up the whole carpet and replace it? Or is that just something you saw that in the beginning, that's as is, there's different things that you can and can't do anything about?
Yeah, it's a spectrum, right? On one hand, you can have a property manager that's very hard on the tenants and everything's no, but then you can have, property managers that don't like confrontation, which is exactly the worst business to be in if you don't like confrontation, because you do have to hold your ground and basically, tell them something they don't want to hear. And that's awkward and not always fun, but that's the job of a manager.
So qualities of a manager, I'm keeping score here. We got market knowledge, incentive alignment, we've got proactive with maintenance, and we've got good communication skills and kind of bedside manner with tenants, so to speak. Anything else you got on the list?
The final one is experience and reputation, and not in that order. So reputation and experience, right? Because reputation, like if a property manager has been doing what they do for a while, their reputation precedes them. Like, I don't mean reputation in the sense of like Google reviews or anything like that, because 90% of a property manager's Google reviews are disgruntled tenants. So, you don't see people that are happy going and leaving reviews, when things are going well. But what I mean is, what is the reputation of this property manager in the marketplace? So that would be, for example, getting references. So I would get references from current clients that they have, and maybe a client that recently left them. I know a lot of times they might not be willing to give that, but if they do, that would give you a little bit of an insight into what goes well, what doesn't go well. So experience and reputation are very important.
I would add something that's been kind of on my mind lately, is that when you hire people to work for you, like a property manager, this is a long-term partnership potentially. And at least that's what I want. Like I'm a long-term investor. I want my properties to be well managed for the next 10, 20 years. And one of the issues you have is very disruptive to have a property manager either leave or have things change. And you did all this analysis early on, and then 3 years from now it's different. And so one thing I'm doing this a little, you got to dig below the surface a little bit. You got to think like a business owner, is actually asking myself, like, what's the business model of this property manager? And are they trying to scale to the moon and try to be like the next big, 5,000 unit property manager in the area? Are they more of a boutique property management firm who does this to sort of be supplying their agent? Like very often you'll have like an agent in the office who has a little property management arm, and they use this to like have clients, to find clients, or to take a tenant and help them become an owner, or have a property manager, an investor who wants to buy another property. Now, so it's sort of like a feeder system for their agency business. And so there's all sorts of, none of those are right or wrong, but I found it an answer that would give me pause is if somebody has 500 units now, they're under management, and they're on the trajectory to try to get 2,000 units. They're like, we're going to take over the city. We're going to be the biggest. We're going to be the best. There's a lot of friction. There's a lot of things that have to happen. You got to hire new people. So that person who was working with me before was my point person there, might not be there anymore, or they might have to move to a new place. And so if they're having a lot of turnover, a lot of growth is difficult, and not everybody can handle it. I like to see stability. I like to see they're making a profit. I like to see that there's a pretty good long-term incentive for them. And this is not a beginner, like first time you meet them, you figure this thing out. But I do think it's a question to ask yourself is, who is this person going to be around doing the same kind of thing 5 years from now? Or if not, are they, what's their trajectory look like for the next 5 to 10 years?
No, those are great points. And I think, there's a couple of points I wanted to make in addition, which is that it's like there are different property management companies for different stages in your investing journey. Meaning the property management company that managed your single family rentals when you first got started might not be the right property manager when you've scaled and now you've got 40 units of different kinds. So it's okay. Like some property management companies are more appropriate for a part of your journey, and then you may need to find somebody that's more appropriate for your level and your portfolio at that point. But I think in addition to that, the property managers, need to make sure, right, that we need to go back to your expectations of the property manager. Meaning, if you want a property manager is going to be attentive to you, and that's going to pick up the phone, and you want to be able to call the owner of the property management companies and get advice from them directly, hiring somebody who's managing 900 units is probably not a good idea, because the higher the number of units that a property management company has, the more systematized they are. And systematized is another word for, corporate-y, right? It's not like what you might expect. So having this idea of, hey, I want somebody who's going to be attentive to me, but I also want the biggest and the best, that might not lead you to the right place.
Yeah, it's like the contractor. You want the plumber who's a good quality plumber, but he works out of his truck and his whole business is run out of his truck with an app on his phone, versus the company that has 30 trucks and they're nationally owned with a bunch of marketing. And there's benefits to both, right?
Exactly.
I tend to like the smaller one, and I'm willing to deal with but there's some downside to having the guy in the back of the truck too, right?
For sure.
There's pluses and minuses.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, we've given people a lot to think about. I think this is such an important topic. Like I've had, once you get into the business, you buy the property, you get it financed, and then you start realizing your property manager, especially for those who are long distance or more passive investors, which I definitely am, is a critical, maybe the critical piece of the puzzle. So I hope we've given some people some thought. Do you have any other final comments to give people just as a takeaway when they're deciding who to pick for their property manager?
It's always important to, verify, the credentials, the experience of the property manager, to ask really good questions, and to call references and actually speak to investors that have direct experience with the property manager. I think those are the critical points.
As someone who is in the property management business as well, and you're also an investor, is it reasonable if somebody comes to you with these list of these questions, are you going to is it okay for them to blow you off in these? Or do you think as somebody who's diligent in asking these questions, they might be thinking to themselves, are they really going to let me ask for references and pick their brain about all this stuff? Or is this a typical thing that if you had a client wanting to work with you?
Well, it really depends on the kind of client. I tend to attract very analytical engineer types, which want data, and they have a lot of questions, and I'm sort of used to that. That is my target audience, right? So I kind of go in expecting, but I can also see a property management company who doesn't like that type of investor, and maybe they're not the right management company for that investor. So if you're analytical and you have a lot of questions, you should be able to ask questions and get answers to most of those things. I mean, there's going to be some pushback because, people can go very deep in their questions and they can ask things that aren't appropriate, but the majority of those questions a property manager should be able to answer.
Yeah, very good. All right. Well, thank you all for watching. If you have any questions about this episode that we just went over, you want us to follow up, you can leave a comment on the YouTube video. You can send an email to podcast@coachcarson.com. I'd also like to hear about other questions you have in the future. This Ask Coach episode format is something we're playing around with, and we're going to do more of this year. So if you like this, let me know, and let me know any other questions you have. And Erion, I want to give you a chance to let everybody know if they want to connect with you, if they want to follow you, where can they find you online?
Thank you. Yeah, they can find me on Twitter or X at Invest Architect, on my website, signaturehouston.com, and on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you again soon. In this episode, we covered one of the biggest challenges of being a rental property investor, finding a good manager. But we didn't cover a lot of the mistakes and challenges you'll have before you even buy the property. And I made another video I think you'll like about the top 5 mistakes I've made as a rental investor. I've always found it better to learn from the mistakes of other people and not have to make that same mistake for myself. So check that video out if you want to avoid those, save some money, and save some headache when you buy your next rental property. You'll find the video above me here and also below in the podcast and YouTube description.